we are seeing right now is that policy making is rarely made by those who are affected and is rarely made by a very diverse set of actors. However, I believe also such moments of crisis and disruption and change are a moment for different communities and also very diverse groups to strategically come together and think through what their vision for society is. Because if we talk about people with an immigration background, but also other voices who are not enough heard in policymaking, there are a lot. These are a lot of people. And it's ultimately in politics, it's about power and who has access and who convinces with their ideas.
Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me on the second part of my conversation with Raphaela Schweiger. Europe continues to wrestle with how to build truly inclusive societies. What's missing in the way we think of integration?
I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is that Europe has changed incredibly in terms of diversity, diverse voices, that we are really good at giving ourselves a bad reputation about things. And still, I think there's lots to do and lots to rethink. One, when it comes to integration, is who defines what you integrate to? What's the logic, right? And how much of your own story do you leave behind? And I think, and I can speak mainly about Germany specifically, but it's a learning journey, I think, in many European countries, is who are we as society? And if new people join these societies and living in these societies, it's a constant conversation about who we are and who is there to define who we are. And I think it at the end of the day comes down to the very core values, which are usually in our constitution, and that's the core. Everything else is negotiable, and we have always changed. And it's the people, it's the new generations, the generational trade-offs and everything that we've seen that's emerging and evolving. And we've seen that happen over the last decades in Germany and Europe, and it will continue. And the more diverse we get, the better we have to learn to deal with conflict and tensions and interests in society. And I think one of the big challenges and what we are really not good at, and this is way beyond the term integration that I don't like or try to not use as much anymore, is how representative our systems, our political institutions. And with our last election in the German parliament, the number of, for example, members of parliaments with a migration background went down. So we are actually not having more representation. We are having less representation. And the same is for, even in that new parliament, the number of women is down. We have very little representation of people with disabilities. So I think we have to ask ourselves the broader question of who represents us and who has access to these institutions and to the political system. And it's a similar fight that women are still fighting when you look over the last decades of history. And that's inclusion, that's belonging, and that's ultimately who's shaping the future of the country. And this has to do with the conflicts that we are having in society, and this is also battles around who influences. And people who've been in politics and who resigned in Germany over the last few months and years are more and more talking about physical attacks, online hate they're experiencing. And I think that's the real challenge, that people who are daring to step forward to bring in their voices and perspectives that are different, they're being silenced and they're being threatened. And this is ultimately an issue for the entire society.
Now that brings me to some more thoughts. You mentioned something which is very close to my heart, which I totally believe in, core values. And core values of a human being, a society, a community, an organization, whether it's a private enterprise, public, or otherwise. Because when you define who you are and what you stand for, then only you can do something. So first recognizing the being and then comes the doing, instead of the other way round. Now, having said that, and which I've seen also in companies in the Western, Eastern, and Southern part of the world, and then I'll go to the next step. Let's say today a society says, these are my core values. This is who we are. And a certain set of people migrate into that society. A and B. Now, generally how it is, please correct me, because again, I'm not in it and I'm seeing it from the outside. I could be wrong. So generally A has their core values if they figured out, this is what I stand for, this is who I am, this is how I do stuff. And now B has come into the place, and in the benefit of integration, apostrophes, we say, hey, listen, I would like to integrate you, so I'm going to share my set of core values in what we do here and so on, so that you understand us better. And I'm going to help you learn our language. I'm going to help you do things. I'm going to do this for you, and I'm there to help you. That sounds very nice. I'm just going through my thought process, which has also been evolving over the last few years while talking to people and observing. So it's all subject to evolving continuously. And then now comes the other side, because I'm saying this because I've had the opportunity to also speak to the other side. So this is all good from my side. I believe I'm being very helpful. I'm being very nice. I'm trying to help. And then now, has somebody asked the other side what their core values are, what they stand for? According to them, it could be something else, and they have another language. They are more than happy. They are obliged to, of course, learn this language, but they have a whole world they are carrying with them inside their little bodies, which they come with. Now, this is something which I'm talking to you, I would not have thought of a year ago. This has also evolved, having observed and dialogued, if there's a word. What do you think? So this word integration, because I believe that when countries, and at some point, I'm sure the Germany, for example, I'm saying Germany because right now I'm also in Germany, also has this welcoming policy and integration, as some other countries I've spoken with, they have, which truly with true intent has been put out, good intent. But you saw the other side I'm trying to project.
Absolutely. And I think you can even start by an individual who engages with the world. If I, as Raphaela, come to you and say, these are my core values, these are my beliefs, this is how I talk, and this is for information for you to deal with me. This would not work between the two of us. And this is not how we interact with our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends. We constantly, as individuals, evolve because of the surroundings that we find ourselves into that influence us and our thinking. And from my perspective, that's the same for people who come newly into a society. It's a sharing and an offering and a giving, and the need and the learning from each other, the joint evolution and development as individuals and ultimately as a society. And because you mentioned what Germany offers to newcomers and the integration courses and all we do, I think on the one hand it's a great offer that we give, which is not cheap, but it's seen as an investment in people. And I know how much Germany struggled with putting together a curriculum that explains who we are as Germans. And I haven't seen the most recent ones. I find it really interesting reading that material because it doesn't reflect me as a German and my perspective and my values. It's a very particular view what you learn about, which also reminds me of my Spanish or French language books in schools that try to explain the French or the Spanish, where friends from those countries are like, this is, it's a very random description, but it's a try as an offer of helping people understand. And, there then these daily stories. There's this one particular region in Germany that it's in the east, it has very, very old houses where you need to open the windows a lot in order to not get moldy walls and all of that, more than in other German households. So there was this family who newly moved there, and then who said in the beginning they were so confused because they had a volunteer neighbor show up at their house every day to make sure they would open the windows. And they did not understand at all. They were a bit annoyed because this person wanted to enter the house every day, until they understood that this person really cared about this old building and kind of the setup and the history, and until they got to a point where they learned from each other and were able to share a bit what's important to them, and that in another part of the world it would be really weird to open the window because where they lived you just don't do that randomly because it doesn't fit the climate and all of these things. So I think it really comes down to, again, the communities and the shared learnings, and how we organize as society that people are more and more going to come and leave. And this is a very circular process oftentimes, that we are speaking multiple languages. How do workplaces organize themselves? Are we more flexible? A very German topic with English language, where a lot of people don't feel comfortable working in, Germans don't feel comfortable working in English, for example. So it's a process, it's a try that we are making, and just looking at the US and other countries where people arrive and be like, here you are, now you support yourself. Somehow try to learn the language, but we gave you the status and now it's all on you. I think there are different approaches to it, all with their ups and downsides. Yeah.
In your opinion, you threw up two wonderful words. I love them. Joint evolution and sharing, because with sharing comes the joint evolution. And I do believe that even before the sharing happened, it's the intention and the attitude which sets the stage for sharing And then there is this openness and no fear that both parties share. Whether what happens after that is another piece of cake, which one of them wants to take whomever's ideas. So in this process of integration, do you think that in Germany, or we've again taken just Germany as an example, or in other parts of the world which you might have observed, this process of joint evolution, it's beautiful. I love that. If that were the agenda, that would be wonderful. Joint evolution, and it's not easy. It's a process, a tedious process, if you may. So do you think that this joint evolution and sharing is happening, or it's a one-way street? Or is there intention of it happening?
I do believe that this kind of joint evolution is happening and will be happening over time. And what gives me a lot of, if I think, oh my God, the world, everything is really bad and really, we're really stuck. If you look at history and over time and also centuries ago, how much other cultures and movements have influenced societies and changed societies and come to new values, new forms of living together. It's not new. It's maybe faster, it's maybe larger in numbers, but it's not new. And societies, including with conflicts that we've seen, including with disruptions, inequalities arising from also movements and people taking the lead in societies, it's always been there. So I think overall this is what's happening, especially in societies that have seen a lot of immigration over the past years and decades. I believe for the time being, we will see much more conflict and tensions about identity, belonging, and increasingly diverse voices. This is what we're seeing in the US. This is what we're seeing in a lot of European countries. This is probably also something we're seeing in other parts of the world. So the question for me is, how are we better learning to deal with increasing tensions and very diverse understandings of how our societies are supposed to work? And are we finding ways to solve that or also come out of this more stronger jointly as societies and not dive into a tendency that we are seeing now in more and more create more conflict, including violent conflict at a certain point. And this is up on us. I think this is conversations with people who think differently, who believe differently. It comes down again to the communities, and it comes down also to what joint visions can we develop for how we want to live. And this is, I think none of our societies are at a point where we have worked out this vision with the heavy disruptions that we are seeing in the world that are affecting the lives of so many people across the globe.
So the word tension that you just mentioned, how do you see the tension between national identity and the need for pluralistic societies playing out in policymaking? Because you said it's still everything is in a flux, and because there's so much of change, and I do agree with you. And however, what happens is everything boils down to all this happens, and then there's somebody there or a certain set of people who make the policies, and then all this is there, which will be led by there, and then this goes haywire. So how does this play out in policy making?
what we are seeing right now is that policy making is rarely made by those who are affected and is rarely made by a very diverse set of actors. However, I believe also such moments of crisis and disruption and change are a moment for different communities and also very diverse groups to strategically come together and think through what their vision for society is. Because if we talk about people with an immigration background, but also other voices who are not enough heard in policymaking, there are a lot. These are a lot of people, and it's ultimately in politics, it's about power and who has access and who convinces with their ideas. And I think this time calls for ideas, creative thinking, doing things differently. And there are gaps opening up of how we organize so many things in societies, between societies, in the multilateral system that is so challenged right now, that there is space for ideas. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that groups who feel not so heard right now, that don't feel so represented or as represented as they should be, because of the changes that we are all kind of analyzing and think tanks are writing about, they're real. They're happening on so many levels. It's also generational changes that are happening in our institutions, at least in Europe, is get your ideas, your groups together, move things, try out things. This is the time for that. Even they might sound very desperate. But I see a lot of people, also many of our partners and people I work with, who are in a way energized to be better, more strategic, better organized in coalitions across countries, regions, to try things out and jointly come up with new things, how we do it, how do we do politics, how we live together, how we think about our system that guides how we are living together on this world.
To take that thought forward, and keeping in mind the beautiful word that you used, joint evolution, what I understand is there are three sets of, I'm putting it very generally, and again, correct me please, three sets of players: people who make the policies, people who are affected directly or who have been affected, and a section of people who are currently not affected by bystanders, whose voice counts because they are also civic society. There is this three sets of players, if I may say. When the policymakers in this particular way, which we are trying to say, have the power and they are in that position where they are shaping the present and the future. So they are in a place of immense importance. It make or break how the future, because once even when there's a logical physics, you set a ball rolling and it affects all the other balls. It'll just take all the balls on the way out. So having said that, three players, how does one get these to jointly evolve? I love that word.
There's a fourth group that we shouldn't forget, which is what we in our work and others call an invisible third, which is a part of society that doesn't feel represented, that it's not engaged, and that are probably also not groups who are directly affected by conflict or migration or climate, who have seen themselves represented in politics for a long time and no longer see themselves because of so many things, who disengage. And I think this is oftentimes also a mistake by activist civil society from all sides to forget these groups in society, to get them on board for their ideas, their visions, because the consequences that we are seeing is that there is a large portion of society, and this is, again, I can best speak to the German context, that feel absolutely lost in our current political thinking and work, who are also not represented or don't see themselves represented in any of the more progressive movements. So this makes it more complex, and I know this is no answer to your question. I think the best answer that I have is coalition and movement building, because you cannot move agendas, and this is the same for philanthropy and one philanthropy alone. You cannot move big agendas yourselves. You need unusual allies. Maybe it's private sector companies who are realizing that we need to be a pluralistic, open society to get the workers that we need to maintain our economic prosperity. Maybe it's people that are very outside your bubble, that you find in having a similar understanding of the need to tackle the climate crisis. So building unusual, bigger coalitions for ideas and move them forward strategically is something that I think many in our field, and that includes myself, us as a philanthropy and others, have not been doing well enough. And I think this is the moment to really strategically think about these questions and how we move forward from here, and what we got wrong also over the last years to get us to also the tensions that we are having and that we are seeing.
Could climate migration also become a catalyst for more sustainable and inclusive cities? Or are we still stuck in reactive models?
I would hope that climate migration is an issue that will not be a crisis issue, that it will be something, and if we look at the numbers and there are projections and data out there, by 2050, which is not that far away, we could have more than 200 people being forced to move globally. And we are seeing this is a reality in so many parts of the world, and not only developing countries. It will also be an issue for Europe. It's already a big issue in Asia. The Pacific is losing territory, including entire countries, if we talk about Tuvalu. The work that I'm seeing that's being done is really preparing for what's to come, and governments being really interested in strategically preparing and working with their communities on adaptation, which also needs a lot of financing and local investments. The right to stay, which is something that when we talk about migration is something that we tend to forget. People want to stay where they are. They want to work their farms. Oftentimes they don't want to go to the cities. And we see an increasing movement of global cities who are working with partners of ours, the Mayors Migration Council, C40 cities, to work on inclusive policies for people who are moving because of climate from rural areas to their cities. And they're doing that strategically, and our partners helping them with data, with knowledge, with policies on the local level to welcome migrants. And oftentimes it's mixed reasons why people are coming. So I also think that cities in the west, east, south, north are united in the challenges and the opportunities of welcoming newcomers to their cities, cities growing, people bringing different skills when migrating for different reasons. And I'm really optimistic about this global movement of mayors who are really keen on implementing good solutions, advocating for financing for those solutions in their cities, and who are committed to this work and are talking about this work publicly from their national context that are sometimes not easy to the regional and the global level in bringing attention to the importance of being inclusive and welcoming on the local level.
Do you think that this topic of migration should also, or is it discussed at COP?
So COP27 in Egypt was one of the first COPs that more prominently featured the issue of migration. And there was a lot of joint work being done by international organizations like IOM and UNHCR, the Global Center for Climate Mobility. We had the first climate mobility pavilion at COP27 in Egypt, where people could really come together around the issue, talk, learn about data, exchange, have high-level engagements where heads of state spoke about the issue, and where we, for the first time, beyond the preamble, in the main text of the COP had mentioning climate migration, climate displacement, including in the setup of the adaptation fund. I have to find the right wording. But it's prominently featured, and ever since, a lot has happened on the multilateral level to bring attention to climate migration, be it through the angle of sea level rise, which again unites so many countries across the globe with the effects that it will have on people, on their land, on security. On sea level rise is also international law of the sea changes because it's coming. International borders are coming closer. So it's something that has really been brought forward. And I'm very optimistic that this agenda is prominently featured going forward. What we need to do now is actively also invest in adaptation and resilience building and bring the money to the communities. We've seen since COP27, which was in 2022, a lot of political UN national efforts that went into this. Countries are taking this issue into their national adaptation plans. I think now is the moment to take all these efforts, look at what's there, the data, the knowledge that we have, the hotspots all over the globe where we know the climate will hit so hard that some places will be uninhabitable. What are the policies that we respond with? And where do we need adaptation? Where do we need relocation? And how can we support the agency of the people who are affected? How can they best decide if they have to move, where they go, how they go, and what's their best way of adapting in whatever form. And this is where I think the climate philanthropy can much more shift resources to governments, which is not an easy moment in time for resources that we are talking about, and also commitments that will be made. Now we have COP30 ahead, commitments that are being made on this and other issues. And I think we are still having a lot of conversation on how much to invest in mitigation and adaptation. And I think they have to go both hand in hand and at much larger scale on both fronts.
But some of my guests mentioned that COP is a jamboree because there are it's a place where people should be seen, in apostrophes, voice their agendas. And since there is no binding legislation that can bind them to their commitments, they go back to do whatever they feel fit to do. So what is your take on this?
I agree and I don't agree. And let me explain why. I think that as long as we have places to talk, to negotiate, to protest, which is happening a lot at COP, for different stakeholders getting together, we need to maintain them, make them better, make them more inclusive, always huge discussion around COP, and not lose them entirely. Because if you lose, and it's the same for the UN, which is undergoing transformations and some of them really necessary, but as long as there is no place where all countries, in the case of climate, polluters, emitters, and heavily affected countries and everybody in between, is coming together to talk, and all the processes, the most important things are happening before COP. Once COP is there, most of it has already happened. We shouldn't lose them. Probably regional agreements are becoming more important, regional meetings for civil society groups working on such issues, or also academics who have the knowledge and the data, thinking through what's their best time and money investment to bring their knowledge and ideas to. And that might no longer be just COP. It might be so many fragmented spaces that we are now seeing. So I'm coming back to what I said earlier. I think coalition building, sharing responsibilities and roles in the system to what we want to get to becomes much more important, because it's not as easy and clear anymore. I go to COP and I try to influence, and then something happens along the way, and then I'm a bit done with that policy issue. That, I don't know if it ever worked, but it's working less and less.
How can we make it work more and more? I have a theory on that, but
I'm not yet to a point where I have a theory, so I would love to hear yours.
Mine is a very generalistic theory, which I can share, is when different countries get together, let's say in this case it is COP, for example, or for any other agendas. Now there are two parts I'm going to break it off into. One is a word which you mentioned, which I also totally agree with, is silos. Everything becomes an industry silo. So climate becomes a silo, peace building becomes a silo, diversity, inclusion, another silo. And they all play around in their silos, break around in their whole heads. This is how it works. But again, till we break the silos and use experts in diversity and inclusion to talk about different agendas, intercultural, to be able to actually even talk about agendas, the ability to make sure that the leaders who come to the table are equipped not only with facts and figures and what the agendas they want, but they're equipped, of course, with the intention to first also understand the other side, but how to be open. And that is a very intercultural question. We are talking from countries who cannot even bring 200 people along with them. They might get 10 people along with them, their financial whatever liabilities. So there is no equality of either intention, number of people, or the material. So therefore, the outcome is not wholesome because there is inequality at the time of arriving at the table. So how can you go away with justifiable material? It's a very roundabout way. So my thought was, there are many, many thoughts which didn't come together in this. One part is there is diversity already, but have everything being represented. Therefore, my question was migration, and thank you for answering that and letting me know, because I had a question about migration also being, because they are two interrelated things, climate and migration. But again, peace building is also an integral part of that. Conflicts are arising, security, there's a complete disbalance. Because COP has been happening every year for last several years. However, if you see the result, the global warming is continuing to rise. There's no shift which has happened.
So I would go even further when you think of how do we go from here, and what interests do governments serve? Who has access to influencing those interests? And I think when it comes to climate, but that's also true for many other political processes, what we tend to forget, we're in the space of working on societal issues, is the big powers that are at play that have much closer access to government, influencing government priorities, and ultimately decisions that they bring to international processes. And step one is, I think, being very much aware of the power that's at play as organizations who are working in that space, and also how you can convince governments that it's in their interest to implement and push for certain approaches. And then I think when it comes to solutions, also working on showcasing the long-term effects and predictions, what's at stake. And not only when we talk about climate specifically, small developing states are doing incredible work in advocating, being really visible. We will host a forum in Berlin in a few weeks, where we will have an incredible amount of guests on a very high political level from very climate affected countries. If this is not high on the interest list of emitters and polluters, because their interest and priority is the war in Ukraine, the geopolitical shifts, the breaking of the order, potential rivalry with China, that's what's on their top agenda, because it's right now, it's immediate, it's a threat that needs to be dealt with. The climate threat is always a bit further away. How do we talk about that? And it's not so far away for many of these countries that we are talking about. And decisions are always made in moments of crisis and in the moment of me as a policymaker feel the immediate need to do something because I can see it in front of my eyes. As long as I cannot see it, it's not something that's top of my list. And there's an imbalance that we are seeing across the world on what's top of the list of policy and decision makers. And I think people working in these spaces can try and make it more visible, can use moments of opportunities and be prepared for moments of opportunities when such a moment of crisis arises, not only say this is really bad, but also we have ideas and solutions that help you as a decision maker and as somebody who's to stand in front of an audience to talk about how to react. And these moments will come. We never know when, but we can be prepared. And that's talking about political strategy and strategic work, and again, coalition building, because you cannot do this kind of work alone.
So it's more, I agree actually on one hand, it's more self-regulation versus binding regulation, because then you want to make it work, which is very different from somebody forcing it down your throat and making you to adhere to it.
And there are beautiful examples of really successful work, for example, where governments take on mayors, youth leaders, refugees into their delegations to COP, to the UN, to other fora and processes where they are informed by those perspectives. And I think there are these tools that have come up over the last few years and where some governments at least, become more inclusive. This is one way, but I think the coalition building, the having ideas ready when the moment is right and building the connections is the ultimate thing that will help an agenda to move forward.
Thank you. I have a long list of things which I would, of course, want to talk to you about, but then we will never end. Thank you for sharing yourself with us today. And I do hope that when we come back, and I do hope we come back to this place exactly a year later, and maybe there might be some more evolution of thoughts and some more dots would have connected to, there were some questions which we threw up, which we left hanging. I hope that when we speak a year later today on this date, we will have a roundup of some of those thoughts.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me and for that inspiring conversation, your questions.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.